Welcome in to the Hot Read Podcast for Wednesday, May the 15th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. You can follow me on social media at Easton Freeze. I'm joined, as always, by producer JT, who you can follow on social media at JT_Ruhnke. And another friend, fellow host here on the 440 Podcast Network, Justin Melo, joining us today. Justin, how are you, my friend?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Appreciate you guys for having me on.
We appreciate you for jumping on. It's time to get creative in our world with off-season podcasting. You gotta schedule ahead. You gotta think of topics to come up with when there's no news. And I thought, what better than to have you on when we're in the middle of running a series of yours on BroadwaySportsMedia.com, where you have really done some digging on the Titans' first-round pick, JC Latham. You have spoken to either two articles out now, to two of his former coaches. There's some more in the works coming, but the All 22 session also on YouTube now, correct?
It is. Yeah, that went live yesterday morning.
Yeah, so a lot of good stuff, and I really just wanted to pick your brain for the next couple of minutes on what you found. And so we're going to dive into that, as well as take a quick look at maybe some of our favorite UDFAs, mention some guys that we think could be folks you want to keep an eye on in July and August. And that's going to be today's show. Let's start with this, Justin. We haven't spoken to you in a while here. And, you stay very busy during the draft season. We're covering the draft both on the same network here, but we've not really crossed streams. So I want to get your thoughts. What's your 10,000-foot view on this draft class? What's your take on what the Titans have done?
Obviously a little bit early, but I really like it. I think they got a plug-and-play tackle in JC Latham at number 7. I think T'Vondre Sweat was the one pick for me that was sort of, we'll see, but really good early feedback there. And I love what they did on day 3. Guys like Jarvis Brownlee Jr. and Cedric Gray. I think those were my favorite picks, and they were, back-to-back with Gray in the 4th and Brownlee Jr. in the 5th. So I think they got some long-term building blocks there at corner. So far, pretty impressed with what they did.
Fair enough. Yeah, that we were positive on what they did as well. And so I just, it's good to get a baseline for how you felt about the Latham pick. Sounds like you're a fan of his. And before we dive into these two coaches you've spoken with, I don't know if you saw, there's been a lot of talk about, moving him from right to left, and can that move be made? And is he somebody that is capable of making that move? And yesterday there was a lot of talk about whether or not he looks like a left tackle or looks like a right tackle. Which isn't really a sentence that makes a whole lot of sense in 2024. But I don't know. Does he look like a right tackle to you, Justin? What do you make of that statement?
Well, look, I'll admit, because I don't like going back on my word. Throughout the pre-draft process, my initial impression was that he was a right tackle. That's what I thought he was when I did my scouting. Now,
so why?
Yeah, I think most people did, right? But the more you've gotten into it, and you're allowed to change your opinion. First of all, I'll put my hands up and say I'm not necessarily going to question Bill Callahan. Just right off the rip, just Bill Callahan thinks he can play left tackle. Who am I to sit here and tell him that he can't, that he's wrong about that, right? Like, I'm not stupid enough, naive enough to do that. That's number one. Number two, I do think it's interesting that the more that I get into it, like I think it was the night he was drafted, Bill Belichick was on like the Pat McAfee show or whatever. They were doing their live stream. And it's always interesting to me when you see people with these brilliant football minds have the same opinion without conversing about it. You know what I mean? There's no bias. Like JC Latham gets drafted there at number 7, and Bill Belichick sat there right away and said, well, I think he can play left tackle if they want him to. Now, before anyone knew the Titans wanted him to play left tackle. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I know we're going to talk about the series, but as I spoke to his O-line coach at IMG Academy, George Higuain, one of the things that he said that, and some background, he won a Super Bowl as a player playing offensive line for the Dallas Cowboys. The last time they won a Super Bowl, he was on that team. And one thing he said to me that I thought was very obvious, but I hadn't seen it mentioned anywhere else yet. It was just kind of a light bulb moment for me that went, that's such a good point. Why has no one said that yet? As you know, they converted him from DN to offensive tackle. And he said to me, well, don't forget, left tackle is how he first learned the position. Like when we took him from DN to tackle, it was on the left side. So he's going to be able to rely on sort of all that baseline info he got when he first, and learning that position is what made him one of the most intriguing recruits in the entire nation. So it's like, to me, that was like, it was so simple and so obvious, but I'm like, I haven't seen anyone say that yet. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and that's, he played, was it four full years at left tackle at IMG before coming to Alabama?
I don't know if it was 4. That seems like a bit much. I don't remember clarifying that or not, but he was at IMG. God, he was, close to it, I guess, because he was 15 or 16 when he first got to IMG. So you got to figure
3 or 4.
4 years, 2 or 3 for sure.
Sure. Well, let's start there. He arrives at IMG, and you spoke to Kevin Wright, he was the head coach down there, correct?
He was, correct. The head coach when he first got there. That's right.
Right. And so Kevin was a big part of, he comes in as a defensive player. That's where he was originally playing. And they decide to move him to tackle. You asked Kevin about, and George, I'd imagine, about the thought process behind moving him to the offensive side of the ball and playing him at tackle. What went into that decision?
It's funny. I got to chuckle about it because I feel like both coaches I asked told me slightly different versions of it, and I assume the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And I'm not gonna bring him on Maury to get to the bottom of it, but it sounded like at some point one of them, or a combination of both of them, felt that he was playing out of position. The way Coach Kevin Wright tells is, we just saw the growth potential. Right, like he's in there, and we get him, and just a 15-year-old kid, and he's already massive. You know what I mean? And we knew he was going to continue growing into his body, and basically just saying, and I thought this was the best quote he gave me. He said, "There's only so many people in the country that have the potential to play offensive tackle in the NFL, and when we see this kid at 15, and he's 270 pounds, because that's roughly what he already was. Said, God, what's he going to be when he's 19, 20? Like, forget DN. Like, you can be a first-round tackle." Right. And the way Coach Hegemean told it, slightly different, saying, we had a bit of a shortage at tackle. I thought he was a guy, based on his body type, that could successfully make that switch. I went to Coach and said, let me take him under his wing and help make this guy a tackle. So truth lies somewhere in the middle, I imagine. I thought it was really funny. That I'll tell you one thing I wouldn't say normally, but any coach you ever speak to, there's always going to be some sort of credit taking, right? Like when it comes to a success story. So I imagine truth lies somewhere in the middle, but I thought it was interesting that both of them agreed at some point that the potential for offensive tackle there was just through the roof.
And did you ask them when they went to JC with this idea, was he receptive to switching sides and playing tackle?
Yeah, I mean, both of them sort of agreed, and I asked them the same question. They both essentially agreed that he was fairly receptive. That one of them joked saying, I don't know if he was 100% all in from the moment we said it to him, but credit him that he took it and he was willing to put in the work, because he could have gone the other way. He said, I got kids, you'd be surprised at 15 that are like, oh, they've already got it built into their mind. I'm a defensive player. I can't do that. And it's
their
like,
identity.
You're 15. Right. You're nothing yet. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know who you are yet. So they said he was receptive to put in the work. And I thought one thing that was interesting that Coach Wright said was the more coaches that came down here from college, and he started to see like they were already starting to recruit him at such a young age as a tackle, the more he started to realize, damn, this wasn't such a bad idea. They were right about this.
Yeah, absolutely. That at that size already, especially being a 15 or 16-year-old, when you're that big, you have to look at it, from an objective standpoint and say, yeah, there are only a few people that can do this. And I'm sure a part of that was, hey, if you're a really good tackle, you make really good money and you get drafted very highly. And so that's something consideration.
Top 10. They said could have gone the other way. That they could have kicked him inside to D tackle. They said they thought he could maybe play 3 tech if they took him on that developmental plan. But they just felt like with the size, even a 3 tech, Jeffrey Simmons, 310 pounds. This kid's 270 at 15. They're probably thinking he's not going to stick at 305, right? Like we're probably getting this kid up to 320 and 330 at some point, even more at Alabama. So, and one thing that I thought was interesting too, underrated part of that story, he ends up having the same strength and conditioning coach at IMG and Alabama. Just a total fluke that a lot of people I don't think have realized yet. Same strength and conditioning coach for a couple of those years.
And so in your interview with George Hegemine, you got the backstory for his nickname, Trench King. How did that come about? What did you hear from George on the Trench King nickname?
Yeah, that was probably the most fun I had talking to Coach George. Talked about how, so he's backstory, he played with Deion Sanders on the Dallas Cowboys once upon a time, Coach did. And they became really, really good friends throughout that time. And they've stayed in touch ever since. So when Coach Hegemine, by the way, he gets to IMG a month after JC Latham. JC's already there when Coach gets there. And he goes, throughout my time as a coach, I've always kept in touch with Deion, FaceTime him when we're around the high school kids. They go crazy. They lose their mind as a 15-year-old being on FaceTime with friggin' Deion Sanders. I think it was JC on the night of the draft. He brought up Coach Hegemin's name unprompted. I don't know if that was what the media called with you guys, but that's where my ears perked up for the story, because I think he said something about Coach Hegemine and Deion Sanders and the Trench King. So the way it goes, at least from George's point of view, was that as he continued FaceTiming Deion around JC thought it was so cool, man, prime time. That's a legacy that's lasted forever. I want something I want to be known by. And it inspired him to start looking up documentaries on Kobe Bryant, like take the Deion Sanders version in every sport. And it just kind of caught JC's attention. He started looking up to all of them and said, well, prime time, you know, Kobe's Black Mamba and all that. I need something I got to go by. So he came up with the King, and they just ran with it. It was a great little story that Coach Hegemine told me.
Now, I'm sure you kind of already alluded to this, but I want you to elaborate. When you broached the topic with both of these guys, both of his former coaches, George Hegemine and Kevin Wright, about him moving from right to left, obviously they brought up, well, he did it at IMG. He's got that muscle memory. He's done it before. But beyond that, did they speak at all to what challenges he may face, or on the flip side of that coin, some things about him as a player they think are going to lend itself to him being able to make that transition?
Yeah, the thing that they both agreed on outside of the history of playing left was they both think he's a terrific athlete, and they think he can do it. I thought the one thing that Coach Wright pointed out, he wasn't concerned at all, but he said it's putting one hand down versus the other. Because what it's going to come down to is repetition. You know, as he gets those reps throughout throughout training camp, and even preseason perhaps, that it should come back to him, and it shouldn't be overly difficult. And keep in mind, he's been training throughout this pre-draft process to do it as well. Like, that was something top of mind for him, where, hey, and that's true of all offensive linemen, to be honest, throughout the pre-draft process. Guards practice center practice guards, and left tackle practices right tackle practices left, right? Because you want to be able to fit in seamlessly. So he's been doing it for a few months already. My favorite part of this whole thing, and I don't know if you got a chance to read the Hegemine one yet, it's pretty new, but my favorite thing about the whole thing was, and I don't know if you were going to bring it up, but there's a tweet you can find from 2020 when I believe it was Coach, when JC had just committed to Alabama, essentially, as a tackle. Coach Hegemine did a story with, I think, a local journalist there in Bama, and he said, well, he reminds me a lot of Tyrone Smith. That's who I think you're getting here at Alabama. You're getting Tyrone Smith. So the journalistic brain here of me, and my mind started going, you know where I'm going to go with this? Like, what a hell of a coincidence that, Tyrone Smith plays right tackle at USC. He played right tackle his rookie year for the Cowboys. And then a little no-line coach takes the job in Dallas named Bill Callahan and says Tyrone Smith is not a right tackle. He's going to be a left tackle for the Dallas Cowboys. And Bill Callahan switches Tyrone Smith from right tackle to left tackle. And fast forward, he's an 8-time Pro Bowler as a left tackle. One of the best, I think, to ever do it. Certainly one of the best of our generation. And now it's Bill Callahan coming to Tennessee. It's like, I just can't believe Coach Hegemine compared him to Tyrone Smith. And Callahan ends up friggin' changing Smith from right to left. Just come on. You got to be kidding me with this coincidence here.
Well, it's a coincidence that Titans fans would love to have history repeat itself on. One last thing on Latham before we talk about some of these UDFAs, and I want to ask you a couple questions about the Titans situation for the Titans. I've read both interviews. I have not yet had a chance to watch the all 22 you guys put up, but it's certainly on my to-do list. So I want to ask you, as somebody that hasn't watched it yet, I saw that it was long. You guys got I'm sure, very in-depth look at a full game, correct? You guys went through an entire Georgia game of Latham?
Essentially the entire entire game. I mean, it probably would have been even longer if we didn't start kind of a couple reps near the end. You kind of glaze over a little bit, especially as we're winding down, and Alabama was in victory formation or 4-minute offense for the end of it. But we were together for like an hour and a half, and I think the breakdown was like 60 minutes. I mean, Coach Wright was incredibly generous with his time.
So what is this? Sell me on this. What's the selling point? What were the main takeaways that maybe things you came out of it like, I didn't think that would go in that direction, and I was surprised by the things he had to say?
Well, first of all, I'll say this. I mean, Coach Wright's a football nerd. Like, you can think you're a football nerd. Neither of us have been the head coach at the best high school program in the country, right? Sure. They're the best program in the entire country when it comes to high school. There's no doubt about that. And he's coached tight ends the last 4 years at Indiana. So he's got quite an extensive resume here of coach high school to college coaching. He's just like, you're watching just the way he breaks down technique. If you're a football nerd, and first of all, you want to talk about how prepared he was? You don't think this was a session? I sent him that all 22 days in advance. He watched the whole thing before he sat down with us. He wanted to be so damn
prepared. Got to be prepared
for this thing because he's a nerd, and he was able to draw on stuff they taught him at IMG. Like, the way to sell you on it, if you're a football nerd, like, great. Put it this way: Justin Graver, who's worked at NFL Films, the NFL Network, my co-host, he's now with Fox Sports. He ends it with, "That's the best thing I've ever done." Like, holy crap! Like, just the way he's breaking down technique. He's like, we had to cut him. Like, he's going for a minute on each play. Just technique.
Okay, Kevin, we got more plays, Kevin. It's okay, Kevin.
Thank you. Yeah. Like, it was unbelievable. At the end of it, he said to us, actually, again, and selling on it, he said to us, which blew me away. He goes, "You guys think you had fun doing that? I had more fun than both of you, I promise."
That's fantastic. That's so it certainly sounds like a tape study you're not going to get from somebody that is in the media.
No, certainly not.
All right, well, guys, go check. I mean, if that doesn't say, I don't know what does. If you got a spare hour in the next couple of days, go check that out over on the Music City Audible YouTube channel. Correct, Justin?
Yeah, more than that. We're on like 1,100 views and counting. It hasn't even been 24 hours, so it's doing quite well early. Seems like Fantastic. People are loving it.
So let's transition to a couple other Titans topics before we get out of here today. I want to start with the tight ends, and that can kind of transition to some of these UDFAs. The Titans have had a relatively thin room this entire process. It hasn't been high on their to-do list because they had much more important glaring needs, but we're at the point now where it has risen to the top a little bit. And when you look at the roster top to bottom, it's like, okay, you know, you got Chig and you got Josh Wiley, and both of those guys have promise, but there's some uncertainty with both players. And then beyond that, you don't really know what you have. They go out and they signed Nick Vanette, who's a journeyman, 31-year-old, I believe, tight end yesterday or the day before. He's played on a bunch of teams, has almost 900 career yards in his 6 or 7 or 8 seasons that he's been in the league, 91 receptions. They don't really have a guy that they've had in the past couple of years who is your glorified jumbo package, lineman style guy that's going to be your big body in there. What do you think the game plan is here? And are you comfortable with where they're at this moment in the tight end room?
I'll be honest. I'm fairly comfortable. I am, because I think Okonkwo and Josh Wiley are going to be your number 1 and 2. And I think you got a good package there of versatility, right? Like, you don't want Chig playing a ton of inline snaps. I mean, he does it a little bit, but no, you want him flexed out wide. You want him in the slot. You want him in the backfield. You want him moving all over the offensive formation where you can get the ball in his hands, and he's a mismatch in the open field. And he's right, he's got good open field speed. He breaks a lot of tackles. He runs through arm tackles. That's what you want him doing. I see Wiley as a bit of a mixture of him and a Nick Vanette, for example, where he's not going to be your, Jeff Swaim, Trayvon Wesco from last year, but he's going to spend more time in line than Chig will, right? Because I think he's a bit of a bigger body, a bit of a better blocker than he is. So he kind of lands somewhere in the middle. That's why I've always thought that, and the Titans think the same way, clearly, that your number 3 tight end should be like a jumbo package designated blocker. And I think that's what Nick Vanette's going to be for them. He only played 125 snaps last year for the Chargers. He was a late season addition for them. What if I told you 102 of them were as a blocker? Out of 125 snaps, 102
sounds about right.
As a blocker. He had 14 snaps as an extra pass pro guy, 6th guy in pass pro, and 80 as a run blocker. So he's going to be a blocker through and through. That's the way it goes. That's what they needed. Remember, they had Trayvon Wesco last year. He played 423 snaps for the Titans, 266 for them were as a run blocker, and 108 in pass pro. Those are the snaps they need to replace, right? What Wesco gave them as a blocker, both in pass pros and run. That's what Nick Vannett's going to do for them. So I think that's your tight end rotation, 1, 2, 3, and you've got clearly designated roles, which is most important.
I'll say this much. A part of my comfortability with this room is because of the projected change with the way they're going to operate on offense, right? If this was still the Vrabel
absolutely
situation, I'd be wondering, hey, where's that Swain? Where's that Wesco style guy? They need that guy. But because of how much they're going to be in 11 personnel, because of the offensive line situation, and if they're wanting to go jumbo, I'm confident that Bill Callahan's going to he'll have forged his arsenal of available weapons there on the offensive line to where you're comfortable maybe throwing in an extra swing tackle for certain packages and not needing that inline tight end. That's where, to me, I think they aren't nearly as concerned about this because they don't plan on doing it the same way.
That's a great point. And look, just look at Callahan's history with the Bengals, right? How many times did they have an outstanding receiving tight end that was like a go-to weapon for them, right? And the Titans, and we can comfortably say they don't need that guy when you've got DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, and Tyler Boyd, and there are going to be an 11 personnel, probably a top 3 amount in the entire league, right? A 32 team. So that's a great point. Well, I think what's certainly is the tackle situation still. You hope you get that to a point where you don't need it in a lot of inline help. We'll see. I think I'm a little TBD on that because I don't love what they have. They're going to work with what they have, it seems.
Right.
It's the same as what they had a lot of players they had on the roster last year didn't play well enough for them, right? So you hope with a change in scheme and a change in coaching that guys like Nicholas Petit-Frere or Jalen Duncan are going to be better than they were a year ago. But you're right. I mean, you look at the history of that Callahan offense, they never had one. And a lot of times, the second and third tight end on that Bengals depth chart was a blocking tight end a lot of that time because of how they use them. So I think they're comfortable with what they've got.
You do a ton of interviews during the draft process, and you talk to a lot of guys you talk a lot of the top prospects, but you also talk to a lot of the guys that end up being UDFAs, and you're known as the UDFA newsbreaker around these parts for the Tennessee Titans. That is when you go crazy for a couple of hours on a Saturday post draft, and so you're familiar with a lot of these guys the Titans brought in. We got our first glimpse of them on the field on Friday last week. And I wanted to ask you of the group, I think it was 15 UDFAs, something like that they brought in.
16 in total.
16, okay. So they got a healthy bunch this year. Were there any that stuck out to you in your pre-draft process or maybe post having seen the Titans sign them, you go and you look into their profile and you're impressed by the upside?
Well, a couple of guys that stuck out to me was Cole Spencer, the guard out of Texas Tech. I mean, number one, look, it doesn't always take a genius, follow the money. $75,000 to Cole Spencer. They gave him more money than any other UDFA. That's not a ton of money, but it was the most they gave any UDFA. Typically, they'll top out UDFAs at like 250. They gave Cole Spencer 75,000.
Right.
Very athletic at the Big 12 Pro Day. A 4.89 in the 40. That's outstanding for a lineman. I mean, 30.5-inch vert, a 9.4 broad. Sounds like an athletic guy. Usually those athletic guys, they're not as strong. Well, he put up 30 reps on the bench press, right? Like his relative athletic score was a 9.43 out of 10. It was by far the best of any UDFA they signed. I think he would have been drafted if it wasn't for injuries. Cole Spencer. I think that athletic profile would have got him drafted. But he only played 6 games this past year. He had a leg injury end of season, and he missed the whole 2022 season with a preseason injury. So he's just not a guy that's been able to stay on the field over these last 2 years, but the profile is there. Cut me off because I'll talk your ear off, but a couple of, Khalid Duke out of Kansas State kind of caught my eye a little. They gave him $52,000 in guarantees. I thought he was draftable. 6 sacks this year. He was on my radar. I scouted him pre-draft. He tested just okay, a tad undersized at 6'3", 246. But I thought the 6 sacks this year, was nice. Took a step forward. If I were to top out at 3, I think the running back out of Washington, Dylan Johnson.
Yep.
That's a guy if you're a college football fan, you might not know a ton of UDFAs. You probably knew Dylan Johnson rushed for friggin' 1,200 yards and 16 touchdowns this year for the most explosive offense in the nation that went to the national championship game. One thing that strikes me about him, he's got good size for the position. 5'11", 217. The play strength is evident on tape. It was evident throughout the testing. 24 reps on the bench. I like what he can do on third down. 24 catches this year at Washington, 150 catches in his previous 3 years at Mississippi State before he transferred to Washington. The athletic profile leaves a lot to be desired, right? There's a reason UDFAs are UDFAs, right? A 4.68 in the 40, not great. The vertical, the broad were below average. But I think when you look at a third down backer, the Titans' number 3 back, it's a guy that runs with power between the tackles, can pass. He's got good size, can pass, protect, and catch the ball. Dylan Johnson does those things for them. So I think you're getting into an intriguing battle here, maybe throughout camp with him, Chestnut. They got another UDFA back in Jabari Small, and of course Hassan Haskins is still on the roster. So if those 4 guys will duke it out for RB3.
And those are 2 of the 3 that I would have brought up. On the topic of Khalid Duke, he's listed as an outside linebacker by the Titans on the roster they gave us on Friday. However, there's reason to believe there may be some positional flexibility there. And our buddy Zach Lyons was talking, I think, on a football show earlier this week about how it would not shock him based on the way that he was used in college if the Titans have in mind trying him inside. And having him play at inside linebacker, is that something has that even crossed your desk yet? Have you thought about that as a possibility?
It hasn't. No, I'll be honest. I'd be surprised. Okay. I see more of they're already doing that with James one. They're short on outside guys. I need a 3-4 outside linebacker. A similar body type. So they drafted Jalen Harrell. I want to say very similar body type to the kid they drafted out of Michigan. So that hasn't crossed my desk yet. No. He's more of a 3-4 outside backer.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Justin, we appreciate your time today, man, and we're gonna continue. I don't want to spoil anything here. What is and isn't announced about this series? Can you tell folks what's coming?
No, I mean I don't mind telling the people. I mean, most of it's done, right? The interview with Kevin Wright's been published. The interview with George Heegan's been published. The All-22 watch along with Kevin Wright is live on YouTube right now. The final piece of it, because I wanted to kind of go in order here, will be an interview with the Alabama O-line coach, Eric Wolford. So my plan was to kind of take you on a journey here from IMG and how it started there to how it ended up at Alabama. So Coach Wolford gave me a phenomenal interview. I'll say this. I've spoken to a lot of coaches in my lifetime, in my career, and he's probably the most blunt I've ever spoken to. God, he just, no, can you say bullshit on here? No bullshit. Straight to the point. I was just stunned at some of the stuff. He did no beating around the bush, and you guys will see what I mean when you read it. I'll ask him a question. He's just, that was this person's fault, or he likes football. He told me he was once in an NFL room where he thought he only had 1 or 2 offensive linemen that actually gave a shit about football. That's how blunt this guy is. So it was really, really entertaining. I can't wait, and I'll tease the audience a bit more. I couldn't stop there. That'll be the end of the JC Latham series. But I recently got with Cedric Gray's linebacker coach, Tommy Thigpen at North Carolina, defensive coordinator there as well. And he gave me a phenomenal interview on Cedric Gray and who he is. And I'm fairly confident that Coach Thigpen is going to be sitting down with me for a film breakdown as well of Cedric Gray's film. So a lot coming here in these next couple of weeks, month, I would say. Everything should be out by about a month from now.
Fantastic. That is some good stuff, Justin. We are looking forward to that. Guys, if you've not gone and read those 2 articles, they're on BroadwaySportsMedia.com right now. Recommend reading those. And then, of course, checking out the All-22 watch along on the Music City Audible podcast YouTube channel. Guys, follow Justin. He's on Twitter at JustinM_NFL. Doing stuff with the Draft Network all year long, of course, here on the 440 Podcast Network and writing over at Broadway Sports Media, doing all kinds of things. Justin, we appreciate you, and we appreciate your time today, my friend. Thank you for coming on.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, guys, we'll be back on Thursday in some form or fashion. I won't be here, I don't think. I think it'll be JT, and he'll be doing something when I'm gone that I probably wouldn't permit for if I was here. So tune into that. It'll be a good time. Until then, for producer JT and our guest, Justin Melo, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.